Do you think silence in a family says more than shouting?
Picture this moment unfolding in my cramped kitchen in Dayton on that ordinary Thursday evening when the fluorescent light overhead buzzed with its usual judgmental hum, and my phone suddenly lit up repeatedly with notifications from the family group chat that I had always treated as a somewhat distant lifeline to relatives scattered across Ohio, only to find my own mother's message waiting there like a gut punch delivered straight from the heart of our fractured family history, reading clearly that I should not bother coming to Emily's wedding because my presence along with my two young boys would inevitably make everything feel awkward and out of place amid the carefully curated perfection she imagined for her younger daughter's big day with Mark, the fiancé whom everyone in the chat seemed to idolize as some kind of ideal catch despite the subtle sleaziness in his car salesman demeanor that had always set my instincts on edge whenever we crossed paths at holiday gatherings. My sister, Emily, who had always been the favored one since our childhood days when Mom lavished her with frilly dresses and opportunities while I navigated the rougher edges of life as the older sibling who shouldered responsibilities far too early, quickly followed up with her own agreement in the chat, stating matter-of-factly that it truly would be better this way for everyone involved, and before I could even process the sting of that double betrayal, the responses started flooding in from Aunt Linda, with her cascade of laughing emojis that felt like salt rubbed into an open wound, and from Cousin Rick tossing in a half-baked joke about awkward uncles crashing barbecues that only amplified the sense of me being reduced to nothing more than the perpetual punchline in a family narrative I had never fully scripted or approved. As I sat there staring at the screen with my coffee growing stone cold in the mug clutched tightly in my hand, the heat of resentment rising steadily in my chest, not just from this fresh slight, but from the accumulated years of slights that traced back to Dad's abrupt departure when I was barely out of high school and Mom's subsequent decision to pour all her emotional and financial resources into Emily's path toward stability, while I pieced together a life raising Jake and Tyler on my own after my ex-husband vanished with his secretary, leaving behind nothing but court papers and a mountain of doubts about my worth in the eyes of those who should have had my back unconditionally. I refused to let tears come, drawing instead on the resilience I had built through countless similar disappointments since signing those divorce papers 2 years earlier, and in a surge of unfiltered impulse, I typed out my response about how they probably would not need my credit card for the venue anymore, a pointed reminder of the generous gift I had extended 6 months prior by fronting the entire $5,000 deposit for that dream Cincinnati location when their own savings proved woefully inadequate, all while they carried on in the chat with more emojis and light-hearted banter that betrayed their complete obliviousness to the powder keg I had just ignited with those words. The boys, oblivious at first to the storm brewing in my expression, eventually glanced up from their evening routines, Jake deeply immersed in his tablet game filled with virtual gunfire and explosions that mirrored the chaos starting to erupt in my mind, and little Tyler meticulously coloring a dinosaur on the tablecloth that now seemed comically out of place amid the tension, with Jake finally breaking the silence to ask if something was wrong with Grandma's party plans, prompting me to force a smile and ruffle his hair while assuring him it was just the usual grown-up nonsense that kids did not need to worry about, even as my thoughts raced ahead to the subtle ways I could begin making them feel the weight of their casual cruelty without resorting to outright destruction. That might backfire and paint me as the villain in the family lore. By the time I tucked them into bed upstairs with the comforting whir of their fan masking the distant sounds of neighborhood life, I had already opened my banking app on the phone, scrolling through the transaction history until my eyes landed on the pending charge for the florist service I had personally recommended and negotiated a discount for as part of the overall wedding package, leveraging connections from my side gig and event setup during weekends when the boys were with a sitter, and with a few deliberate taps on the screen, I canceled the order by fabricating a scheduling conflict that would undoubtedly leave Emily and Mom scrambling for alternative arrangements on a timeline that grew shorter by the day, deriving a quiet satisfaction from the mental image of their faces contorting in frustration when the confirmation call inevitably came through to their end. That small act of retaliation felt like reclaiming a sliver of the power they had so effortlessly stripped away over the years, especially considering the deeper undercurrent of financial entanglements that included the vague promise Mom had made last year about repaying the money she borrowed for Emily's engagement ring, a debt that intertwined suspiciously with the venue payment in ways I had only begun to suspect might hold more leverage than they realized, and as I set the phone down on the nightstand with a bitter smile playing on my lips, the device immediately sprang back to life with an incoming call from Mom herself. Her name flashing insistently on the screen as her voice cut through the line sharp and demanding an explanation for what exactly I had meant by that provocative text in the group chat, leaving me momentarily frozen in the dim glow of the bedside lamp while my mind whirled with the possibilities of how this confrontation might unfold far more rapidly and explosively than I had ever anticipated in my initial haze of anger. Mom's voice on the other end of that late-night call carried the familiar edge of authority mixed with defensiveness that had defined our interactions ever since I became the responsible older daughter who fixed things while she focused on Emily's brighter prospects. Her words tumbling out in a rush about how the wedding was meant to be a flawless escape from the everyday stresses that plagued our family since Dad's abandonment left us all navigating financial tightropes and emotional minefields, insisting that my so-called drama had a way of overshadowing everything good and that excluding me along with the boys was simply a practical choice to keep the atmosphere light and celebratory for Mark's more polished relatives who might not appreciate the raw edges of our Midwestern clan. I listened through most of it without interrupting, murmuring vague apologies that satisfied her enough to wind down into complaints about the rising costs and vendor headaches already cropping up, all while my mind replayed the group chat betrayal and the quiet cancellation of the florist order that I knew would soon ripple back to her in ways that forced accountability without me having to shout it from the rooftops. And by the time we hung up after what felt like an eternity of one-sided lecturing, the house had settled into that profound quiet of a suburban night broken only by the occasional car passing on the rain-slicked street outside, prompting me to grab my laptop from the cluttered coffee table and settle into the worn armchair under the single lamp's glow as the boys slept soundly upstairs, unaware of the undercurrents pulling at our family fabric. Scrolling through my email archives with a growing sense of purpose fueled by the resentment that had simmered unchecked for too long, I unearthed the venue confirmation buried amid promotions for local car deals and reminders about overdue library books, the details jumping out to confirm not only the full $5,000 charge I had authorized on my credit card, but also the backstory Emily had shared in hushed tones during her pleading call months earlier about how Mark's credit history bore the scars of past mistakes, including a gambling streak that nobody dared discuss openly at family dinners, turning what I had viewed as a sisterly gift into an unwitting bailout for their precarious setup that now struck me as profoundly unfair given how often I had been the one extending lifelines without reciprocity. A dry, incredulous laugh escaped me in the empty living room, the sound echoing off the walls lined with the boys' school drawings and faded photos of better days, as I reflected on what a collection of thoughtless opportunists they had become to accept my help so freely while dismissing me as the awkward element in their narrative, particularly when layered over the unresolved debt from last year when Mom casually borrowed funds for Emily's engagement ring under the pretense of a quick repayment plan that evaporated like morning fog, a vague entanglement that now seemed to connect directly to the venue payment in a web of favors I had extended to maintain some illusion of family solidarity despite the one-sided flow. The following morning unfolded in the familiar rush of school drop-offs and a hurried cup of coffee amid Tyler's cereal mishaps that left sticky trails on the counter. But even as I navigated the traffic-clogged roads to the warehouse for my shift amid the beeps of forklifts and the scent of stacked pallets waiting to be inventoried, my thoughts lingered on crafting a subtle confrontation with Emily that avoided outright war while planting seeds of discomfort. So during a brief lull at work I pulled out my phone and sent her a private message feigning concern about the guest list logistics as if the group chat exclusion had slipped my notice entirely. Her response arriving in hesitant bursts that wove excuses around limited seating and a desire for a streamlined vibe without delving into the hurt she knew she had inflicted. I pressed gently on the venue details, suggesting I confirm the booking myself to ease her mind, and watched her typing indicators dance for what seemed like ages before she assured me everything was locked in thanks to my invaluable contribution. Remaining blissfully ignorant that I had already contacted the coordinator earlier under the cover of verifying family allergies and strategically placed a temporary hold on the payment authorization, a maneuver designed to postpone their final site visit by a full week and incur those pesky administrative fees that would nibble at their already strained budget without alerting them to my involvement directly. That act of understated retaliation brought a fleeting rush of empowerment after years of being cast as the dependable fixer who faded into the background. A feeling I shared in passing with my coworker Brenda over lukewarm sandwiches in the break room where she regaled me with tales of her own in-law skirmishes that made my situation seem almost quaint by comparison. Yet the true undercurrent of intrigue surfaced later that afternoon as I clocked out and checked my inbox during the drive home through the golden hues of an autumn sunset filtering through the windshield, only to find an unexpected alert from the venue's billing office flagging an anomaly in the card verification process. Not the routine acknowledgement I had anticipated, but a detailed notice referencing discrepancies linked to an older co-signed obligation that Mom had mentioned in passing years ago during the fallout from Dad's failed business ventures, and as I pulled into the driveway with the engine ticking cool, my pulse quickened upon opening the attached documents that hinted at Emily's indirect involvement in financial shortcuts far beyond the wedding expenses, blurring the lines between simple ingratitude and potential deceit that forced me to confront whether escalating this leverage would unearth truths I was prepared to face or plunge our family into a confrontation none of us could recover from unscathed. That flagged email from the venue's billing department lingered in my inbox over the next couple of days, like an unwelcome guest who overstayed their welcome at one of those obligatory family reunions where everyone pretends the old grudges have faded into polite small talk. Its implications about deeper financial irregularities tied to Mom's past co-signing escapades pulling at me even as I threw myself into the relentless rhythm of warehouse shifts where the constant hum of machinery and the sharp sense of cardboard and diesel fuel provided a temporary distraction from the brewing storm within our family dynamics that had always favored Emily's smooth sailing over my choppy waters. I resisted the urge to dive straight into the attachments right away, instead channeling the unease into mundane routines like packing the boys' lunches with the precision of someone armoring them against the world's sharper edges. But the guilt-tripping barrage began almost immediately thereafter with Aunt Linda's voicemail arriving during my commute through the gray drizzle that painted Dayton's streets in a monotonous sheen. Her voice laced with that feigned concern about preserving family unity and how Emily was merely jittery about the spotlight of her impending nuptials rather than intentionally severing ties that had already frayed under years of uneven affections and overlooked contributions from my side of the ledger. Mom escalated things further by appearing unannounced on my doorstep that very evening with a plastic grocery bag bulging with off-brand chips and sodas, as if such token gestures could mend the rift caused by her initial text that had set this whole unraveling in motion. Her eyes narrowing suspiciously when I let slip during our strained conversation over lukewarm tea at the kitchen table about the florist cancellation being nothing more than an innocent oversight on my part that had nonetheless sent them on a frantic hunt for replacements and inflated their budget in ways that pinched their already tenuous finances without a hint of gratitude for the leg up I had provided in the first place. I held my tongue on the fuller extent of my retaliatory nudges, biting back the litany of ways Emily's so-called perfect life had been propped up at my expense, from the redirection of child support funds during my early single mom struggles to the hushed speculations at last year's Thanksgiving dinner about Mark's entrepreneurial ventures that carried the unmistakable whiff of get-rich-quick schemes masquerading as legitimate real estate opportunities, doubts I had previously dismissed in the interest of harmony, but now allowed to fester like untreated wounds in the lead-up to an event that promised to expose every hidden fault line running through our shared history. The boys, ever perceptive to the undercurrents of adult tension despite their tender ages, picked up on the shift during our evening meal of spaghetti from a jar that Tyler inevitably sloshed onto the floor while Jake dissected his portion with the focus of a budding engineer. Jake finally voicing the question that hung unspoken in the air by asking why Aunt Emily had decided against inviting us to what he imagined as a grand party complete with cake and dancing, while Tyler chimed in with his wide-eyed hope of serving as the ring bearer in his Sunday best that still bore the grass stains from weekend soccer romps, their innocent inquiries striking me with a force that twisted the knife of resentment into something more personal and painful because involving them in this mess felt like a betrayal of the stable world I had fought to carve out amid the chaos of divorce and dead-end jobs. That night, as I stood before the bathroom mirror brushing my teeth with mechanical strokes under the harsh vanity light that highlighted every worry line etched by sleepless nights over bills and bedtime stories, I grappled with the moral quandary of whether my quest for payback was morphing me into the very type of resentful figure that had driven wedges in our family long before I ever wielded a credit card as leverage. A self-doubt that only deepened when a deeper twist emerged from my compulsive late-night scroll through archived Facebook messages exchanged with a mutual friend from our high school days who had unwittingly preserved Emily's vent sessions about the relentless pressure from debt collectors circling Mark like vultures over roadkill, revelations that echoed the gambling undertones hinted at in the venue email, and painted a picture of their union as far more precarious than the glossy invitation suggested, confirming that my financial intervention had served as a desperate patch on a sinking ship rather than the celebratory gift I had intended. Emboldened by this newfound clarity yet wary of overstepping into outright malice, I crafted my next act of revenge with calculated subtlety by submitting anonymous tips to the caterer under the guise of a concerned attendee highlighting potential family allergies that necessitated a complete overhaul of the menu toward safer, blander fare like steamed vegetables and plain rice dishes that would deflate the gourmet aspirations Emily had boasted about in earlier planning sessions. A witty disruption that I envisioned sparking a domino effect of frantic adjustments and escalating costs without directly implicating myself in the fallout. The satisfaction of that maneuver mingled uneasily with a growing unease as the group chat reignited with vague complaints about mounting logistical glitches from cousins who had been looped into the vendor woes, their messages carrying an undercurrent of blame that skirted dangerously close to my doorstep. But just as I began to rationalize pulling back for the sake of the boys' unscarred perceptions of kin, the evening took a sharper turn when Jake and Tyler burst into my bedroom with faces flushed from the hallway shadows, having overheard the entirety of a heated phone exchange I had mistakenly left on speaker with Mom earlier that afternoon during a moment of unchecked frustration where I had accused her of perpetuating favoritism that poisoned everything it touched. Their confusion manifesting in Jake's demand for clarity on whether we were truly persona non grata at the wedding and Tyler's clutch on a crumpled drawing as if it could ward off the encroaching discord. A heartbreaking tableau that left me frozen in the doorway while my phone vibrated once more with a message from an unidentified number purporting to be a venue staffer offering insider dirt on Emily's concealed history that threatened to upend the entire affair, forcing me to weigh the perilous allure of further revelations against the risk of ensnaring my children in a vendetta that might irreparably alter their innocent view of the family bonds we still pretended to hold dear. The anonymous text from that self-proclaimed venue insider sat on my phone screen like a forbidden fruit dangling just within reach during the quiet hours after the boys had finally drifted off to sleep amid the soft glow of their night light that cast elongated shadows across the walls adorned with their crayon masterpieces and soccer trophies earned through muddy afternoons on local fields, its promise of explosive revelations about Emily's hidden past tempting me to respond even as every parental instinct screamed to shield our fragile peace from the potential fallout of dredging up more family skeletons that could shatter the tentative normalcy I had rebuilt in the wake of my divorce and the endless grind of single motherhood in a town where everyone knew everyone's business from church potlucks to corner store chats. I waited until the next morning's rush had ebbed after dropping Jake and Tyler at school with their backpacks slung heavy over shoulders and lunchboxes packed with the last of the week-old deli meat, pulling over in the warehouse parking lot before my shift amid the rumble of incoming trucks and the sharp tang of exhaust mingling with autumn leaves crunching underfoot. where I cautiously replied to the unknown number seeking verification without committing to anything rash, only to receive a torrent of attachments including grainy scans of financial statements and email chains that peeled back layers on Emily and Mark's entangled debts, detailing how my venue payment had inadvertently plugged gaps from an ancient loan Mom had co-signed during the turbulent years following Dad's business collapse when she chose cosmetic home renovations over settling creditor claims. A decision that rippled forward to ensnare Emily as a reluctant co-signer in her early 20s to safeguard her budding credit score for future ambitions like the very wedding now teetering on the brink of disaster. Those documents flooded my mind with long-buried memories of the overtime shifts I had pulled at the factory line back then to front the initial bailout money, framing it as a one-time assist to keep Mom from foreclosure while Emily jetted off to community college parties unburdened by the weight of our shared hardships. A pattern of sacrifice that now crystallized into a profound sense of exploitation as I scrolled through the evidence during stolen moments in the break room, surrounded by the chatter of coworkers swapping stories about holiday plans and kid milestones that made my isolation feel all the more acute. The emotional undercurrents boiled over that very evening when Mom orchestrated what she billed as a family intervention via a group video call that assembled aunts, uncles, and even distant cousins on their screens from living rooms across the state. Her face filling my phone with a mix of feigned vulnerability and stern accusation as she outlined how my subtle sabotages from the florist flop to the catering swaps were poisoning the well of what should have been Emily's joyous milestone, the chorus of voices piling on with pleas for unity and reminders that blood ties endured beyond petty financial spats. Yet I countered with measured precision by referencing the loan repayment clauses buried in those unearthed papers, watching their collective composure fracture into stammers and deflections that betrayed the depth of the deception woven through our interactions for over a decade. The boys hovered in the background of my feed, drawn by the raised voices echoing through the kitchen where dinner cooled untouched on plates, and in a moment of questionable judgment born from the heat of exposure, I included them peripherally by explaining in simple terms that sometimes grown-ups had to step back from events that hurt too much to attend. A choice that elicited Jake's sullen protest about foregoing the promised cake towers and Tyler's wide-eyed query on whether this meant Grandma's love came with conditions now there. Reactions piercing through my resolve and amplifying the internal conflict over whether protecting their hearts justified escalating a feud that risked tainting their memories of holidays and birthdays with lasting bitterness. With the wedding now just 2 weeks away, and the air thickening with the scent of impending frost on the wind that whipped through the neighborhood during my evening walks to clear my head, I channeled the surge of vindication into a more strategic withdrawal by formally removing my authorization from the core vendor network through a series of polite emails disguised as clerical corrections. A clever cascade that triggered cancellations for the photographer's deposit and the string quartet's booking, moves that landed like precision strikes to inflate their chaos without overt fingerprints leading back to me, deriving a wry satisfaction from the imagined frenzy as Emily's frantic texts bombarded my inbox, blending desperate appeals with veiled barbs about my inability to let go of old resentments. That fleeting triumph intertwined with a sharper twist when the insider's follow-up message unveiled whispers of Mark's rumored infidelities circulating among Cincinnati's social circles. Details that posed excruciating dilemma as I paced the linoleum floor under the hum of the refrigerator late into the night, torn between anonymously tipping Emily to spare her further heartache or withholding it to let their house of cards tumble under its own weight, all while the group chat simmered with escalating complaints about phantom glitches and ballooning expenses that hinted at the noose tightening around their plans. The atmosphere grew heavier with each evaded call and cryptic update from relatives caught in the crossfire, uncertainty coiling in my gut like the fog rolling off the river during my drives to work. And in a bid for clarity, I rummaged through the attic's dusty boxes that night amid cobwebs and forgotten holiday decorations, unearthing a yellowed envelope in Mom's looping handwriting that itemized outstanding debts, including the exact sum I had covered for the house down payment years prior. serving as the pivotal clue that this vendetta transcended a single snub to encompass a lifetime of imbalances I had passively enabled through silence and support. As the calendar pages flipped toward the ceremony with unseasonal storms brewing on the horizon that mirrored the turmoil churning inside me, the ultimate cliffhanger materialized in a terse voicemail from the venue manager verifying the activation of full cancellation protocols due to the persistent payment flags. But tacked on was a chilling postscript suggesting Emily had long been aware of the loan's intricacies and was quietly marshalling a counter-strategy of her own that could flip the script entirely, leaving me to stare at the darkened ceiling with my heart hammering in the silence as the first drops of rain pattered against the window on the eve of what promised to be a day fraught with revelations and reckonings beyond my control. The morning of the wedding dawned beneath a canopy of brooding Ohio clouds that pressed low over the landscape like the weight of unspoken resentments accumulated across decades of family favoritism and financial maneuvering, prompting me to load Jake and Tyler into the minivan despite the internal debate that had raged through the sleepless night prior as rain-slicked roads wound toward my sister's old family home on the fringes of Cincinnati, where the ceremony venue loomed just a short drive away, my plan ostensibly to deliver an innocuous box of neutral greeting cards and framed photos from our childhood summers at the lake that captured fleeting moments of unity before Dad's departure fractured everything irreparably. Though beneath that facade pulsed the final thread of my orchestrated leverage ready to unravel their carefully polished event with a precision that balanced satisfaction against the moral quagmire of involving innocence in adult vendettas. As we pulled into the gravel driveway lined with delivery vans ferrying last-minute florals and linens under the watchful eyes of harried coordinators barking orders into headsets, Emily emerged from the front door in her terry cloth robe with hair pinned in disarray and makeup half applied, her face registering a cocktail of bridal anticipation and raw alarm upon spotting us, rushing forward to envelop me in a hasty hug that carried the faint scent of setting powder and desperation as she whispered explanations about how Mom had orchestrated the exclusion solely for the sake of impressing Mark's more affluent relatives who viewed our branch of the family tree as a bit too rustic and unrefined for their tastes, her voice cracking with admissions that peeled back the layers of her complicity in the loan deceptions by confessing how she had buried knowledge of the debts to evade the guilt of relying on my interventions yet again, particularly as Mark's resurgent gambling habits had devoured their joint savings in ways that rendered my credit card extension not a gift, but a clandestine lifeline extended into the abyss of their poor choices. Mom materialized moments later from the side entrance, her curlers still bobbing and face etched with the strain of overseeing a production that had already hemorrhaged guests and vendors due to the cascade of cancellations I had subtly engineered over the preceding weeks, launching into a vehement diatribe about the sabotage that had transformed her vision of elegance into a patchwork of compromises from subpar catering to absent musicians, her tirade faltering into stunned silence when I produced the attic-found envelope with its meticulous ledger of outstanding obligations, including the house down payment I had shouldered during their darkest hour. A major revelation that forced Emily to her knees in the damp grass as tears streaked her foundation, unveiling the full extent of Mark's financial black hole that had co-opted family resources without remorse, and positioned her pleas for understanding as a desperate bid to salvage the day before the assembled kin arrived to witness the cracks. The boys remained buckled in the van, their faces pressed to the windows absorbing the spectacle with a mix of curiosity and unease that tugged at my resolve as thunder grumbled distantly over the river valley, presenting a dilemma that crystallized the ethical tightrope of my revenge where withholding the final pull on the venue authorization might preserve some shred of sisterly bond while deploying it could affirm my long-denied agency, ultimately guiding my finger to compose a discreet message to the coordinator instructing a provisional hold on the booking coupled with an anonymous leak of the billing irregularities to the Ant Brigade notorious for their gossip chains at bridge clubs and PTA meetings. A witty denouement that ensured the ceremony proceeded amid whispers of fiscal scandal and improvised toasts laced with awkward undercurrents, mirroring the very exclusion they had inflicted upon me and the children. That calculated strike yielded a hollow empowerment as I slid back behind the wheel and navigated away from the property with the venue's confirmation of refund pinging my phone like a digital echo of vindication. The rain commencing in earnest to blur the receding figures of Emily and Mom huddled in conference amid the arriving limousines, yet the boys' subdued questions about whether we might circle back for the cake portion of the event pierced through the adrenaline, highlighting the questionable wisdom of exposing them to the fray even peripherally and planting seeds of doubt about whether my actions had reclaimed dignity or merely perpetuated the cycle of hurt that defined our lineage. Hours later, as reports trickled in via the unavoidable group chat now flooded with cryptic updates on delayed proceedings and budget-driven pivots to communal potluck elements that stripped the glamour from Emily's dreams, a final text from her arrived laced with a weary forgiveness for the orchestrated chaos, but underscored by a resolute declaration of permanent estrangement to protect her nascent family from further entanglements. An ambiguous closure that compelled me to veer into a roadside diner where the fluorescent lights hummed over checkered floors, and the scent of greasy fries offered scant comfort as Jake and Tyler picked at their meals in contemplative silence. Staring at the transaction alert for the untouched venue fee returning to my account amid the clatter of silverware and murmured conversations from other patrons nursing their own life tangles, I pondered the true source of the awkwardness that had prompted their initial rebuff, not my presence or the boys' unpolished energy, but the entrenched secrets and imbalances we had all nurtured through inaction and selective blindness, leaving the overarching question to linger like the steam rising from my untouched coffee about weather severing. These ties represented the ultimate liberation or a self-imposed isolation that echoed the voids left by Dad's flight and my ex's abandonment. A thought-provoking void that promised no easy answers in the rearview of a family forever altered by the pursuit of what felt like justice at any cost.